Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring you curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I'll be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we journey up north to visit the best little family store just south of the Canadian border. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here on this journey up north with me to the last stop before crossing into Canada is arts and entertainment reporter Jay Gabler. Jay, welcome back.
Thank you, Wyatt, and it was fun to journey up to the border and across with you. We're not going to talk about our little adventure north of the border. That was for another story, but this is maybe our most epic road trip yet, our first international road trip.
Very true, very true. Got a secret project in the works, secret venture up into Canada, so stay tuned for that. But before that secret part of the journey, this is the furthest north we've, I believe, ever gone for Northlandia, and probably ever will, because again, less than a mile north of that is the border.
Yeah, Jimmy had that Isle Royale story, but as you know, you didn't actually go to Isle Royale to report from Isle Royale. So yeah, maybe this is our furthest north reporting trip for this series.
So maybe let's start by establishing exactly, specifically where we are, which was at Ryden's border store and also gas station. And so what is it and what does it sell?
Ryden's border store is a store, as the name indicates, basically on Highway 61, technically on Ryden Road. You basically follow the north shore of Lake Superior straight up to the Canadian border, and right before you hit the checkpoint, there's a store. It's your last stop store before you cross the border, which makes it popular for people heading north who want to stop and stock up on whatever necessaries they might want to pick up on this side of the border before crossing into Canada to go on a fishing trip or visit Thunder Bay, what have you. Also, a really popular stop for people from Canada who want whatever you might desire from the United States. This is sort of the minimum you need to get into the United States before you have a shopping opportunity. So they have a lot of Canadian customers as well who come down very often and will patronize their store. They have a duty-free store. They have a currency exchange. They have all sorts of souvenirs. I will let owner Lori Boomer, who goes by Sam, ask me after this why she goes by Sam, but I'll let Sam Boomer explain what sort of material they sell.
It's different between seasons, obviously. So in the summertime, it's souvenirs. Lots of t-shirts, sweatshirts, the usual tchotchkes, mugs, shot glasses, keychains, stuffed animals, just fun stuff. And then we have a wide variety of snacks, especially for the Canadians coming down. Everybody likes what they can't get, so they like to buy, this American candy. So in the wintertime, it's mostly snacks and pops and drinks and stuff.
All right, Jay, you told me to ask you, why does she go by Sam when her name is Lori?
This is an indication of just how wrapped up this family business is with the business. So Sam Boomer, Lori Boomer, is a third generation owner of this family business. And so she grew up basically in the store, and one of the employees at that time was named Sam when Lori Boomer was very young, and she would just kind of follow him around and had fun, following him and helping him on his daily rounds. And so people started to call her Sam's helper, and then just started to call her Sam. So to this day, people just know her as Sam.
I guess that's one way to get a nickname. And so this is a 4-generation family business. Let's walk through the family tree, which you literally, looking at the table from me, you literally have a family tree drawn in your notepad over there.
Yeah, to draw out the family tree, just because I wanted to make sure to get everything right. So the business was started by Ed and Mabel Ryden, who bought a pre-existing lodge. More on that in a minute. That was 1947. They ran it for a while, and then it became time to pass it on to a couple of their kids. Here's Debbie Bakke, granddaughter of Ed and Mabel Ryden, explaining what happened as the business got passed on to a second generation.
I think probably about the same time that our grandparents retired. I think they kind of split the businesses. Larry took the store and my parents took the gas station. And my dad wasn't a big drinker and there was alcohol at the store, so I think that's why he chose the gas station. I'm not really sure how it all worked out, but...
And you say your parents are deceased?
Nope, my parents are still alive.
Oh, still alive, okay.
Yeah, they're on a 60th anniversary cruise right now.
So the second generation was a couple of sons of Ed and Mabel Ryden. You had Pete, that would be Debbie's dad, with his wife Phyllis. So Pete and Phyllis ran the gas station. And then Larry other son of Ed and Mabel and his wife Dorothy ran the store. Then eventually it passed on to a third generation. Both businesses did. So Larry and Dorothy passed the store on to their daughter Sam, who now runs it with her husband Mike. Meanwhile, Pete and Phyllis, happy anniversary, by the way, Pete and Phyllis, passed the gas station on to their kids, Debbie and Mike. So you've got this whole extended family situation operating this store and, in fact, living at the store. They live in a collection of homes that are kind of behind the store there. So really a short commute for all of them. And as Debbie told us, thankfully they all get along really well because they work closely together and they live closely together.
Mm-hmm. And so we've got the store and we've got the gas station. But this was originally, the business was actually also a resort.
Yeah, here's the story as Sam told us.
My grandparents, Ed and Mabel Ryden, lived in Hill City. He was a logger, cut his toe so he couldn't work, so they vacationed up the shore at the old border. This is the new border. At the old border, and they stayed at a place called Sextus City. His name was Sextus Lindahl, and he owned just a small little beer garden souvenir store, and they fell in love with it and bought the place and moved up there in 1947 and started Ryden's.
So this is actually where we get into the question of where the border is. So the border has not moved. The U.S.-Canada border is where it has been for a long time, but the road that crosses the Pigeon River, thus becoming the sort of Grand Portage border crossing, has moved several miles to the east. It used to be up at what was called the Outlaw Bridge. It was a bridge originally built in 1917 by a group of people who just wanted a bridge there. So the Rotary was involved. It was this big civic effort, but there wasn't a government entity involved. So hence it was, quote unquote, the Outlaw Bridge. So that's where the crossing was for a long time. Then in the mid-60s, the government got involved, built the current bridge where it crosses the Pigeon River, and that is now where the border crossing is. So at that point, the border crossing moved several miles to the east where it is now, and Ryden's moved with it. You know, they knew this was coming, and so they bought land where they needed to, and they moved the entire building, the whole store, the whole operation. And so they moved the whole operation east to the current location. In fact, they even took the building that used to be the actual customs station for the old, border check, and that is now part of their property, and it serves as housing for a couple of their workers. So there's a lot of history in Ryden's.
Mm-hmm. And wasn't that building also used to be a restaurant?
The store used to have a restaurant. There was, going back to the 40s, the 50s, serving food and drinks was a bigger part of the business than it is now. Now you can, buy bottles of liquor at the duty free, but it used to be until fairly recently, they used to have an operating restaurant. You could get drinks there. And apparently back in the 50s, when blue laws were more restrictive in Ontario across the border, and when laws regarding the regulation of operating a motor vehicle after having a couple were a little bit more lenient than they are now. Apparently, Canadians used to come down on Sunday and take advantage of the beverages for sale at Ryden's and would have quite a party. Apparently, a big favorite was not a Duluth beer, sorry Fitkers, but Grain Belt beer. Those Canadians absolutely loved Grain Belt Premium out of Minneapolis.
Oh, wow.
Yes, we actually saw the area that used to be a restaurant and the kitchen that used to supply that restaurant. It's still in the building now that houses the store. But what they do back there now with the area that was the restaurant and was the kitchen is they store packages there.
Yeah, so that's, as we know now, is a huge part of the business is their Canadian package service. So how does that work exactly?
I was really interested to learn about this, although it's a huge thing. There are all sorts of these places like this along the U.S. side of the Canadian border, as you go all on the border, that will provide this kind of a service. So Ryden's is the one that does it here at the Grand Portage crossing in the Northland. So essentially, Canadians will order packages from U.S. merchants. They will mail them not to the Canadians directly at home in Canada, but they'll mail them to Ryden's border store, which receives them and hangs on to them for a certain amount of time for a reasonable fee. So why do Canadians do this? It didn't even occur to me that this would be a thing. And I've mentioned this to people, and sometimes people assume, oh, so the Canadians are all just sneaking stuff across the border, right? They think they're being sneaky and they're not going to pay, whatever fees are necessary and et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, well, who knows if everybody is honest with, what they do with the material they buy and pick up in the US. But I will say, there are some very, very large packages that get delivered to Ryden's. They have 2 garages for storing things. They own 2 forklifts. People will buy materials like to rehab their garage and have them shipped to Ryden's. So, we're not talking about stuff that you're going to throw under a blanket in the back seat, right? So clearly this is stuff that they're going to, be declaring as they pass across, and it's still worth their time. Also, there are some merchants that won't even ship to Canada. They just don't. And then other cases, I gather, shipping to Canada can be expensive. The fees can be more reasonable if you just sort of bring the stuff across yourself. So there are all sorts of very legitimate reasons that Canadians would do this. And this service was one of the things that helped Ryden's get through COVID when the border was essentially closed for 2 years. Here's Sam Boomer.
The parcels for the Canadians never stopped during COVID. So we still got mail, UPS, Speedy, obviously much less quantity. So we had to be here every day for the parcels because they had 2 companies that could come down and pick up the parcels for the Canadians.
All right, so we've already talked about a lot of different aspects of the store and what the store used to be, including formerly having a restaurant, all the tchotchkes and items that they have and snacks that they sell, the package service. But do they have any other interesting features at the store?
So many. Why? And you got to see some of them when we went up and visited. I'm going to anticipate your question a little bit regarding what makes this a Northlandia store. We talk a lot about, people here in the Northland loving to maintain a tradition. You really got a microcosm of that here because it feels like almost everything that this business has started over all the decades, and then not everything. Obviously, some things they have stopped doing. For example, operating a resort, operating a restaurant, that kind of thing. But there are a lot of little fun traditions that get carried on from selling jerky. They sell a lot of Jack Link's jerky made right here in the Midwest to selling an annual calendar, like an old style wall calendar that people love to, get every year, to selling certain treats from the U.S. Apparently, Canadians love to come down and buy salted nut rolls made in St. Paul, Minnesota. And so there are all sorts of little traditions like that. Apparently, the biggest photo op at the store is the bear. Wyatt, maybe I'll let you describe what this bear is, because we both laid eyes upon it.
Well, I would say it's a standing bear with a fishing hat on it and a fishing pole, and looked like he's maybe holding a beer of some kind and kind of like greeting like an old buddy welcoming you to the store. But not the entrance of the store, more like the halfway point of the store. Like if you were to walk past the counter to the back part of the store, maybe going to the bathroom or something, there the bear is greeting you.
Yeah, basically like elbowed up at the bar, holding an unopened bottle of Michelob Ultra, if I correctly read the bottle cap. And so I asked Sam about that, and she said, oh yeah, actually this bear became a permanent resident after first being an unwanted guest. Here's Sam Boomer.
When we had the restaurant, he just kept coming, and he was unafraid. So right at the back door. So we did call, we did get permission to shoot him because he was kind of a nuisance bear, and there's a lot of little kids around. And then his fur so beautiful, so then we had him stuffed, my dad did, and they did all that over the phone. He had to measure the bar. They were worried about getting it over the lip of the bar. So yeah, he's been around a long time.
With the audio quality there, I'm guessing that this is a separate conversation you had with Sam after our on-camera interview.
Yeah, there's so much to this story. We got to talk to Debbie and Sam both on camera, but then I got to have the whole tour of the package area. We flipped through an album of family photos, which was amazing. So it was annotated by hand by Sam's grandparents. So this really incredible, piece of family history chronicling all the changes this business has gone through over all the years. And yeah, there could have been 5 stories just, in this store. So it's really hard to condense it down to just one.
Mm-hmm. And they also had a trifold poster board that had photos from across the years of the generations of the store ownership and such. They had a whole catalog of past memorabilia to show us.
Yeah, and that's handy for us as journalists, but also, I think, as Sam pointed out to me, it's not just that this is a multi-generational family business. The customers are multi-generational as well. So she says, you have customers come in who saw us, meaning, the grandkids of Ed and Mabel grow up. We saw and are now seeing their kids grow up. And so you have these sort of families that have been patronizing this store for generations. And I can just imagine, some grandfather walking into the store with his grandkids and saying, we used to come here back when I would go fishing in the 50s. And, then I can imagine, Sam pulling out the photo album and he can be like, oh yeah, that's how it looked. And this is where this was and all of this. So I just imagine there are a lot of stories that a lot of people have and have shared about this establishment, both among the proprietors and among the customers.
Mm-hmm. And on the subject of multi-generational, what was it like for the family members growing up at a border store?
Yeah, this is one of my big questions, because to me, this has got to be like one of my absolute favorite books as a kid was From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler. Have you read that book, Wyatt?
I have not.
So it's basically a kid's chapter book about these two siblings who go to live for reasons, read the book for yourself, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And, it's fiction, but they pull it off, and I totally bought it as a kid. And I just was obsessed with the idea of having this whole museum to yourself, and you can do whatever you want, overnight as kids in this museum. And it sounds like it was a little bit like that being a kid growing up at this border store. Here's Sam Boomer.
It was great because when we were little, it was not open in the wintertime. So we would play games around the store. We had it seemed like a lot more snow back then too. We would build forts, and it was our own little playground. It was great.
I mean, I think about growing up in Duluth, and, I didn't grew up with a parking lot like that, like an entire, retail parking lot, gas station, all of that. We just had a neighbor next door to us on Woodland Avenue who had basically paved over her entire backyard so she'd have room to turn her big boat of a car around. And we loved it as kids because when, she would hire a plow to come in and clear the snow from her huge driveway, and they would push it all over into our yard. And that was just amazing. You felt like you had, Mount Everest in your backyard. I can only imagine what that was like up at Ryden's General Store with this huge parking lot once you get those mountains of snow, at Grand Portage in the deep winter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a staple for me growing up was I grew up across the street from a middle school, and the big parking lot there, the plows would plow these giant piles, and as kids, you'd climb the piles of snow and just jump off of them and roll down it, and dumb kid behavior.
Yeah, it sounds like the trade-off was, they did have a long school bus ride to get to, to school. But yeah, a lot of fond memories for them growing up. And that obviously has informed, their decision to stick around and continue to operate this business.
Yeah, which then, begs the question, has the family ever thought about selling the business? Like in the past, have they thought about it? Have they thought about considering it for the future? Because as you mentioned earlier, the fourth generation is kind of a question mark, perhaps. They're not a little bit uncertain. So maybe have they thought about it?
We talked to Debbie Baki about that, and, she also had super fond memories of growing up at the store and the gas station and gathering for Christmas Eve at their grandparents' house, which is now the house where Sam and Mike live. So just obviously these long, rich family traditions. But she said that initially, when she was graduating from high school, she didn't think she was going to stick around in Grand Portage. Here's Debbie.
I went to Duluth after school and tried school down there for a bit, and I ended up coming back here. So I didn't plan on coming back here. No, I didn't always like it as a kid, being so far, the school bus ride and all of that stuff, living out in the middle of nowhere. But it kind of grows on you. It's not so bad.
So Jay, I know you already anticipated my question of how does this fit into Northlandia. So now I'll rephrase a different question, but a similar vein of what was your biggest takeaway from our journey up there and then subsequently putting together the story in the time afterwards?
It was really neat to see an establishment so close to the Canadian border. It's obviously a really important feature of our region. That's what makes us the Northland, not because we're the furthest north place on the continent. Far from it. There's this entire country up there north of us, but we consider ourselves the Northland because we're about as north as it gets in the continental United States. So you hit that Canadian border, and that becomes a really important feature of our economy, of our culture. But you don't feel the presence of Canada as directly, of course, as you do when you're just right there within a mile of the border, right, Wyatt?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a sign next to it. It's like a half-mile sign from the border, so it's definitely got to be less than a mile.
Yeah, and so I think you really see with this store the relationship between the United States and Canada. We don't need to get into this in the podcast. I mentioned a little bit in the story that clearly this is a time where relations between the U.S. and Canada are changing, where some norms are being shaken up a little bit. I mean, talk of tariffs, this kind of thing, has added a little bit of stress to the relationship between the U.S. and Canada. But this has just really been a long-standing, tight relationship. And you really see in a community like this the interconnections between your Canadian and your U.S. communities for people who live close to the border and even within reasonable driving distance of the border, having access to this other country with its resources and its opportunities and its products, whether you're ordering a package or whether you're going to go fishing or whatever. Clearly, these two countries are just so tightly tied across this border, despite the fact that it is a very real international border. We showed our passports and did the whole thing, had them check our back seat and everything.
They know what our secret project is up there because we had to tell them what we were doing.
Yeah, we had to detail, we had to say where we were going. Yeah. So it's certainly a very real international border, but you just seeing the interconnections between the U.S. and Canada at this border store, and hearing from the proprietors of this business how these have really unfolded over generations. You have Canadians who come down every week and have been for generations, and you have U.S. families who go up to Canada for fishing or recreation or whatever, and they do that every summer, and so the family looks forward to welcoming them back every summer. And so seeing the really the tight ties was really it was neat to see, and it showed me why this is such a distinctive feature of our region. One thing I did note with interest, when you look at all the souvenirs for sale at Ryden's border store, you get a lot of Canada souvenirs, which is a little bit counterintuitive, given that, the story is on the U.S. side of the border. So you're not actually in Canada when you're there. But apparently there aren't a lot of stores just right on the north side of the border. So a lot of people, if you're going to pick up a Canadian souvenir, you get it at Ryden's. But then the U.S. souvenirs, it was almost like more of them said Minnesota than said U.S. And I don't know if that's because maybe, Canadians are more excited about coming to Minnesota specifically than coming to the United States more broadly. Or, I had another theory why. I see what you think about this. I wonder if it's to the credit of Canadians that they understand that there are differences between one state and another. And they know that when they're coming to the United States, they're not just coming to the country, but they're coming to a very specific state with its own laws and norms and culture and geography. And I don't know, I feel like sometimes coming from the U.S. side, we cross the border and we're just like, well, Canada, we're in Canada now. Province? What? I don't know. We're in Canada.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I see in a lot of the media I consume, other parts of the United States refer to Minnesota as just a part of Canada, or Canada adjacent. Like there's that joint association. So if our own countries is making that assumption for out-of-state Minnesotans viewing us that way, I can't imagine it's too far of a stretch thing that nearby Canadians view us. You're that kinship there. Closeness, So, but the other theories listed might also be true. I can see them all being true for different people.
Well, we'll see. I know there's this talk now about the U.S. somehow incorporating Canada. I don't know if I actually see that happening, but that's now been floated out there. But, at the end of the day, maybe the way it shakes down is Minnesota just joins Canada. I don't know.
That's probably as political as we're ever going to get in this podcast.
I don't know what Ryden's border store will do if the border moves down, south of the Twin Cities.
Hey, they moved it once. They can move it again. Might be a little bit of a further move that time around than last.
That's a great point, right? What?
All right, that's probably a good spot to end, Jay. We'll end it there before we venture too far in the political theoretical possibilities of borders and such.
Sounds good, Wyatt. Thanks.
And thank you for joining us in this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, see photos and video produced by myself, visit DuluthNewsTribune.com/topics/Northlandia. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber to Duluth News Tribune at DuluthNewsTribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss. You're in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path in the rush to return, here in Northlandia.